So Let the Lord Sort Them is about the death penalty, the sort of particular policy choice that we as Americans have made to kill people who have committed murder. In the 1970s, America began to sort of embrace the death penalty, leading up to a peak in the institution in the late 90s. And ever since then, it's been disappearing. I wanted to explore the reasons for that rise and fall, and also explain the ways in which the death penalty affects the lives of the many people who come into contact with it, from lawyers to prisoners to family members to executioners. And I decided to focus on Texas, my home state, because it has been the cultural and political and legal epicenter of the death penalty in the US. Many years ago, my first job after college was with the Texas After Violence Project, which is a small nonprofit that carries out oral history interviews with people affected by the death penalty. I interviewed people on all sides of the issue, from a mother whose son had been executed by the state to a prosecutor who had claimed to have invented a tactic for convincing juries to sentence people to death. It was through this work that I realized you could use personal stories to educate the public about these larger policies that we collectively choose. And this led me to a career in journalism. Eventually, I had done so much reporting on the death penalty that I realized I could kind of round up all of these stories into a larger portrait of the death penalty. I hope readers will see how much power they actually have as voters to shape the criminal justice system, and how much work it will frankly take to create a new system. We got to where we are in terms of the criminal justice system because we continually voted for prosecutors and judges and governors and legislators who promised to make us safe. And it still is easy to sort of have that impulse to punish when we see a really terrible crime on the evening news. But in order to actually undo mass incarceration, to make progress in the next steps, we're going to have to learn how to see people, even people who have committed really terrible crimes, with impulses of mercy and healing and reparation rather than just punishment. In the book, I write about the case of Juan Quintero, who in the mid-2000s in Houston was accused of killing a police officer. Mr. Quintero was undocumented and had previously been deported to Mexico after a charge of sexual assault. Houston at the time was the sort of death penalty capital of the United States, and it was widely assumed that anyone who killed a law enforcement officer would get the death penalty. But the lawyer in the case, Dana Lynn Reeser, investigated Quintero's life story. She and her team traveled around Mexico and Texas, interviewing every classmate, every family member, every person really that Quintero had ever come into contact with, and they built a complex portrait of his life. And they showed the jury that the murder was not premeditated, but was rather the product of a single panicked mistake, and that Mr. Quintero felt immense remorse for what he had done. The jury ended up sparing his life, and he is currently in prison, and I felt this case was a dramatic example of how even people who have committed the worst crimes can be seen with mercy if someone goes and does the work of trying to build a portrait of what in their life led them to the point where they committed the crime.